founder of Sunseed The Journey, and today's host, Amritat Cohen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sunseed Wisdom Talks. We're going to start today by lighting the candle of divine unity. Sorry for the slight delay today. We had some technical difficulties, but we're all ready to go. Today, we have three friends as our special guests. The Interfaith Amigos. You might think at first that they would perhaps seem to be unusual to create a camaraderie. They first met just after 9/11, almost 20 years ago. At that time, they all felt the need to bring healing and information and share with others the truth of what was going on for them in a time of great turmoil. Over time, they worked together, they became very good friends, and respected each other and each other's religious traditions. So I'm going to introduce with great joy the Interfaith Amigos, Ted Falcon, Rabbi Ted, Jewish tradition. Hello.
Good to be here, Amritat.
Don McKenzie, Pastor Don. He's a member of the minister in the United Church of Christ. Don, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amitabh.
And Imam Jamal Rahman, who's in the Islamic Sufi tradition. Imam Jamal, thank you for joining.
Honored to be here. Thank you.
Today, we're going to do something a little bit differently. Usually, we start with a discussion and questions and answers. But today, we have a special treat. The three friends have agreed to do a special presentation for us. So we're going to jump right into that. Ladies and gentlemen, the Interfaith Amigos.
I know we can hear the applause even through the ethers. The reality is for us, Amritat, we are delighted to be joining you. We're delighted for this opportunity to share with you and with your viewers, and to let you know a little bit about what we've been up to and to respond to your questions as well as the questions of your listeners. We begin by kind of looking at why interfaith is so critical to each and every one of us. And I share something of my history, given that I grew up in an area called Cleveland Heights in Ohio, which had a relatively balanced mix of Jewish people and non-Jewish people. I had Jewish as well as Christian friends, but at the end of my junior high school experience, we moved to a suburb where there were very, very few Jews, and I discovered something I had never encountered before, and that was a kind of violence from those who called me Christ killer and worse. And I learned what it was like to meet literal violence aimed at Jewish people. It was mystifying at first, and I began to understand the incredible animosity. I had good friends who suddenly told me that they could no longer come to my house or have me come to their house because their parents had discovered that we were Jewish. It became clear to me that anti-Semitism was not just a fact of history, but it was a present reality. And the truth is, even now, there are more violent acts against Jewish people and Jewish institutions than against any other religious group in this country. And this is happening right now. It appears somewhat hidden, given the other crises in which we are involved. But for me, it's very real, and it's something with which I live. So I began to understand that something was deeply wrong. I discovered that there's something within the Christian tradition that kind of inbreeds anti-Jewishness, a usurping of the wisdom of my tradition and taking it away from the Jewish sources. So the kind of dialogue that I've been involved in, and especially the dialogue with the Interfaith Amigos, has allowed a kind of healing to emerge, not only for me personally, but a way of communicating the possibility of deeper healing, of deeper understanding, of deeper cooperation that can be expanded and shared with a larger interfaith community. Interfaith dialogue is an essential aspect of my ministry, of my life. Brother Don.
I think it's, I'll go ahead, Brother Ted. I'll go next.
You're right.
Yeah, yes. Unless Don wants to go first, but
No.
Okay. So let me start with my story in London when my hair was black many decades ago. I was a student, and I came across this group called the Skinheads, who had a very strange philosophy that, the economy and culture of Great Britain was declining because of the influx of these South Asian immigrants. And all we had to do was scare them, and they would go home, and Great Britain would become great again. So I had some encounters with these hate group skinheads, but there was one particular encounter that really was dangerous. I felt I could have been killed. It was way more beyond just racial discrimination. For the first time, I felt a fear of my physical safety. And I never experienced that before. It was a very, all I can say is a strange feeling. Anyhow, I managed to get out of England, come to America to study, and things were fine until 9/11. Then my religion became a problem, especially in airports and ports of entry. And I don't want to exaggerate. I mean, I've got good connections, friends who protect me very fiercely. But I became aware, both from my London experience and from my American experience, that, when there is this feeling of not belonging, not only does it make me dysfunctional, or my Islamic community dysfunctional, it makes the entire community dysfunctional. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. When one part of the body is not feeling well, the entire body feels unwell. We are unimaginably interconnected. Brother Don.
Thank you. Thank you, both my brothers. Friends, you've heard truths being named by my two colleagues, which each point to the Christian repudiation of Judaism and Islam. I don't need to tell you that Christianity repudiates everybody who isn't Christian, and that's a horrible, I would say, misinterpretation of Jesus' teachings. But where does that leave me? Here I am, a straight, white, male, Protestant American, What experience have I had with persecution? None, except one tiny, and I use the word tiny because in comparison to persecution, it's very small, but I'm left-handed, which, writing with my left hand, that's not a big deal. But for the first 5 years of elementary school, I was chosen last for the softball team because I was left-handed. And it wasn't until Little League came to my town and discovered that being left-handed, you could play first base, and overnight I was a hero. But what that left-handedness did was put a crack, a very tiny crack, in the monolith of my privilege. And that has been with me all my life. And I think that was one of the reasons why when my two colleagues and I started to work together, I had a predisposition to understand more and so forth. I think all this came to a head, though, for me at a community Thanksgiving service that was held in our church in Seattle, University Congregational. And I offered to have the cross covered because it was an interfaith Thanksgiving service. And the organizers told me that because it was a Christian church, they always honored the tradition of whoever was hosting the service. So we did not cover the cross. But when I got up to welcome people, I felt moved to say that I understood that the cross for non-Christian people was not a friendly symbol. In fact, it could be a symbol of violence and persecution. And so that for me, when the cross became a symbol of inclusion, hospitality, unconditional love, oneness, compassion, all the things that are so important, I would really feel good about its use as a symbol. It just seemed to make sense to me to say this. And I looked out at the congregation, many of whom were not Christians, and they were crying. And I suddenly realized just how important it is for a Christian person to be able to begin to empathize with the lives of people who've been considered to be the other, who've been persecuted, and so forth. So again, like my two colleagues, interfaith dialogue is crucial to all these activities.
Thank you, brothers. We always say that it's not just even a matter of hospitality, interfaith, it's a matter of our survival and how critical it is to build trust and connect with the other on a human level.
And so interfaith cooperation, we believe, can help us to work more effectively toward the things we need right now, social justice and environmental justice.
And interfaith dialogue can help us deepen our shared spiritual quest, that we might awaken to the deeper kind of healing that needs to be.
So, greetings, everyone, and thank you, Amitat, for inviting us to be with you today, with you and everyone here, and to give us the opportunity to share with you all the things that we've been learning on the way of our pilgrimage for the last 19 or 20 years. When we started working together after 9/11, we used to open our presentations by saying, "It's a troubled world, is it not?" We had no idea. And now we can't even imagine what the right thing to say would be, because the world is so deeply divided, so troubled, so badly in need of cooperation and justice and so forth. The first sentence of Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, begins with the phrase, "Life is difficult." He doesn't say it's impossible or bad, but it suggests the need for being intentional and focused on the things that do help us to be inclusive and so forth. And these days, we would say also that there's a deep need to find ways to help each other, given all the things that are happening. And so we believe, once again, that interfaith dialogue can be very helpful as we find ways to navigate our way through these very turbulent and difficult times.
Thank you, Brother Don. It's important to state that we have learned to begin with two basic assumptions, two basic principles. One is that every authentic spiritual path is an avenue to a shared universal. And when any path thinks it owns the universal to the exclusion of other paths, we are all in trouble. And that trouble will manifest in one way or another violently, whether that violence is psychological or emotional or actually physical. The second assumption is that spirituality is actually a consciousness. It's a greater inclusive consciousness. The more spiritual our consciousness, the more we experience our connection to ourselves, to each other, and to this precious planet on which we live. The less spiritual our consciousness, the more separate we experience ourselves, the more alienated we experience ourselves, the more we find ourselves needing to defend ourselves against others and somehow not only protect ourselves, but focus on getting for ourselves alone. The second assumption is that spirituality is not a what, it's a who. It's an awakening to the more inclusive nature of our own identity.
Thank you, Brother Ted. And we know from our experience and the study of history also that one of the best ways to overcome polarization is simply to come to know the other on a human level. You know, in Central Asia, there's a wonderful idiom. Can we share 3 cups of tea? Listen, respect, connect. What is listening? Which is so critical for all of us to learn. I love Maulana Rumi's description metaphorically. He says, listening is like putting your head on the person's chest and just sinking into the answer. I love that insight that an enemy, an adversary is someone whose story I have not listened to. That's listening. Then there is respect. If I meet an adversary, someone difficult, I am against that person's behavior, not that person's being or essence, which is Christ nature, Buddha nature, Elohim nature, Allah nature. You know, this wonderful 15th, 16th century sage Kabir, he said, you know, when you meet somebody difficult, protect yourself. Don't allow yourself to be abused. Take the right action. But as you take the right action, he says, I beg you, please, do not keep this person's being or essence out of your heart. And just this differentiation between behavior and being, as we take the right action, has the power to shift heaven and earth. Lastly, connect. Share human stories, joys, sorrows of everyday life. I love this wonderful saying, this universe is made out of stories, not atoms. Of course, I love Rumi, who says, oh God, you have created this I, you, we, they, to play the game of adoration with yourself. We should play this game more often.
I really love it every time, Brother Jamal, you mention the listen,
right,
respect, connect. And I'm always reminded of the way it appeared in the newspaper after a presentation. Actually, it was at a wonderful spiritual center outside of Las Vegas a few years ago, where the reporter reported your comment. Instead of listen, respect, and connect, it came out, Imam Jamal taught the basics of Lipton, respect, connect.
I should have gotten a good commission from
you. Should have gotten a good commission. I really appreciate the depth of that kind of meaningful connection. We began working together over 19 years ago, when the consequences of the horror of the criminal act of 9/11 became consequences of the vilification of an entire religion. It became clear that interfaith dialogue had just not touched what it needed to touch.
And so as we began, we really began with a question: why has it been that interfaith dialogue has not been able to bring us to a place of understanding and reconciliation that is so badly needed, and that could be the consequence of interfaith dialogue and action?
So when we got together, beginning our association and our communication with each other, we did what most interfaith groups do when they get together, and that is we brought our sacred texts, the basic teachings of our traditions, to share with each other. I don't know whether on this medium you can see everybody, but you'll notice that my colleagues have brought their books. I, of course, brought the original tablet. And we shared from our sacred texts.
Let's try again.
That's how it was for the first 3 years. Now, we do that obviously as a joke. But the reality is that it is challenging to allow ourselves to appreciate the wisdom that springs from another tradition. Like, whether we are consciously aware of it or not, often we somehow feel that our own way, our own tradition, our own affiliation, our own membership, our own identity would somehow be watered down if we allow ourselves to really appreciate the beauty that springs from another tradition. So we have learned the value, the enrichment of really listening and of really appreciating. The words I was sharing before I was so rudely interrupted were from an 8th century before the Common Era, a prophet who spoke to a northern kingdom of Israel, reminding us that ritual alone was not what was asked of us. Ritual was meant to remind us of the spiritual and ethical imperatives of living as a full human being with each other and on this planet. It was Micah who said, Higid lacha Adam ma tov, it has been told you, humankind, what is good, Uma Adonai doresh mimcha, and what the Eternal One asks of you. Ki'im asot mishpat, nothing other than doing justly. Va'ahavat chesed, and loving kindness. V'hatznea lechet im Elohecha, and walking with integrity in the presence of your God. Often that's translated into English, walking humbly, but humbly in English has a different connotation. And the context, the message of Micah was not to diminish the integrity, the beauty, the fullness of our individual unique beings, but to utilize this precious physical being awakening at this time and at this place to channel and bring forth and share that love, that kindness, and to act with that justice.
Thanks, Brother Ted. It's good, once again, to be able to listen to those important words. I was reading from the 15th chapter of the Gospel according to John, beginning at verse 12, where Jesus is speaking to his followers and encouraging them to remember some things. And the text begins this way. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends because I have made known everything to you that I have heard from God. You did not choose me. I chose you.
Thank you, Brother Don. And this is probably the 300th time I forgot to bring my reading glasses. Of course, I do this deliberately so I can use my third eye and impress you, actually. So the words here are, idfa billati hiya ahsanu fa iza allazi ba'inaka wa ba'inahu ad'awatun ka innahu waliyun hamim. Meaning, repel evil with something which is better, so that your enemy becomes your intimate bosom friend. So you can see, my dear friends, that all of our holy books have such priceless, beautiful insights. So what is the problem? The problem, of course, is that living them is so very inconvenient. So my dear brothers, we've shared these insights. Let's now share some of the teachings which overlap in our traditions, but each of our tradition has a specific precious core teaching which is particular to our own tradition. Let's go over them one by one.
Thank you, Brother Jamal. In Jewish tradition, even before it was called Jewish, Hebrew tradition, there was a radical awakening, an awakening flowing through the teaching of Abraham, an awakening to oneness in a world with radical awareness of separation, radical awareness of contention among different peoples. It was perceived that each of the peoples had their own God. In fact, every high place, every mountain had their own deity. When a people struggled together, it was God against God, as well as people against people. And there was an awakening to a radical consciousness of one. Over the centuries and over the millennia, that consciousness, that awareness of one has evolved. It's not that one has evolved, it's that our capacity to understand, to appreciate, and to live into the reality of that oneness has continued to expand. We remember and we forget. We remember and we forget. But when we remember, we know that that oneness reflects a shared presence, a shared being, a shared consciousness that so radically connects us, not only to each other, but to our planet. That oneness carries with it automatically an ethic. So over time, it got called ethical monotheism, because our oneness allows us to awaken to the simple reality that when we support one another, we support ourselves and support all others. And when we contend with each other, when we hurt each other, when we cause pain, we are causing pain to us all, and we are causing pain to ourselves. We believe that the essential truth that awakened through ancient Hebrew tradition is the evolving understanding of the radical nature of the one we share, the one we are striving to remember, that one awakening within each and every one of us, whole and entire, that oneness that we strive to witness in each other, that we might appreciate and act with the awareness of the absolute dignity, absolute sacredness of each and every being. We believe that the awakening to oneness is the first essential teaching, the core teaching of what has become the Jewish tradition.
Thank you, Brother Ted. In Christianity, we believe the core teaching is unconditional love. But before we get into that, it's important to note that Jesus' ministry was absolutely framed by everything you just heard from Rabbi Ted. He was not a Christian. He was a Jew. He was a rabbi. He was a teacher. And so the oneness that is so essential was the framework for his teachings. But we believe the core teaching in Christianity, which also exists in Judaism and in Islam, is unconditional love. Now, if you just say the word love, there are too many things, way too many things that could mean. And unconditional love kind of slips off the tongue. But think about this, loving without conditions. Have you ever done that? Do you do that? And how do we do that? There is no one word in English that really makes us think about loving without conditions. The word grace probably has the closest meaning, but we don't think about loving without conditions even when we hear that word. I think the best example of this reality in the Gospels is when Jesus uses the parable of the prodigal son to teach us about this. And as you know, the younger son asks for his inheritance, which was standard in those days. He takes the money, goes to a distant country, a kind of metaphor for a place of estrangement, you might say, and he wastes his money and finally comes home, expecting the best to be made a slave or a servant on his father's farm. But what happens, the parent runs out and grabs him and says, "This my son was dead, is now is alive, was lost and now is found. Thanks be to God." And so what we experience here is not just acceptance and forgiveness, it's unconditional love. It's loving without conditions. And that is something that does not happen because we say, now I'm going to love without conditions. It's a way of being, a way of understanding experience that can come through a variety of ways, but one of the best, of course, spiritual practices. And to me, it helps to explain the verse in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He's not just talking about some kind of ideal. He's talking about the practical reality of loving without conditions. Unconditional love, the core teaching of Christianity. Brother Jamal.
Thank you, Brother Don. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and peace be upon all the prophets and prophetesses, said that the entire wisdom of the Quran can be distilled in one word: compassion. And he elaborated compassion for yourself and compassion for others. So spiritual teachers in Islam, they use the metaphor of water, as in other traditions, to explain the power, the beauty, the majesty of this divine attribute, compassion. There is nothing as soft and yielding as water is, yet for overcoming the hardest, the most insurmountable, nothing is as powerful as water is. Also, wherever water falls, life flourishes. Meaning, the person who is gentle, merciful, kind, is possessed of raw, authentic strength, and is also life-affirming and life-bestowing. You know, being a Bengali, I love that poetry by Tagore, if I remember. He said, not hammer strokes, but the gentle dance of the waters sings the pebbles into perfection. So in Islam, the core teaching is compassion for self and for others.
Now, it seems to me that all this raises a very significant question. with the beautiful core teachings of oneness, of unconditional love, and with compassion, how is it that we are in the state we are in, and our world is in the state our world is in?
Brother Ted, you have said it. This is the question. And the answer is that we've gone astray from our core teachings. We have drifted. We have lost them. And we didn't, in some ways, don't even know what they are. Or we're not even aware of what they are.
And brothers, this has been over the ages, the pattern of history. I love that wonderful saying that we learn from history that we do not learn from history.
But in every case, there have been those in our traditions that have called us back. In what has become Jewish tradition, the prophets in every age were among those who would speak truth to power, who would speak remembering to forgetting, who would urge us to awaken, to reawaken, to remember that which is truly of significance, that which is truly sacred, that which is truly one. Again, an 8th century prophet, 8th century before the Common Era, speaking words that are still yearning to be fulfilled. When Amos spoke to the people, Amos spoke to the people and said, just let justice roll down like waters, righteousness, like a mighty stream, calling us back to right action in the world.
And Jesus called us back. Jesus' ministry mirroring those concerns of Amos, and called us back to the Hebrew concept of chesed, which is translated in English as loving kindness or steadfast love. Coming back, calling us back through unconditional love, loving without conditions.
And the Prophet Muhammad, he called us back from the worship of the ego, the little self that idolizes money and power. So in the 7th century Arabia, he declared, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, meaning bring divinity, not your ego, in the center of your life.
Thank you, Brother Jamal. I think it's important to say that we believe that the paradigm has shifted in our time. We believe that we've reached the stage of spiritual maturity when we can no longer depend on someone outside to call us back. We believe we've reached the stage of spiritual maturity when we have to take responsibility for calling ourselves back to the core teaching of our tradition, or calling ourselves back to the core teaching of our lives, calling ourselves back to that which is truly essential and that which is truly inclusive.
And we believe that interfaith dialogue among those with faith, and yes, even between and among those who would not use the word faith, can create an inspiring foundation for that awakening we need just now. But we must find ways to really listen and communicate with each other.
You know, from our experience, we found that there are 6 stages of interfaith dialogue that really help us go beyond this terrible chasm polarization. Let's go over them.
It is interesting to note that until our 3rd book, we only found 5 stages, which was always challenging to divide into 3 people during our sharing of them. Fortunately, we know now there are 6, so each of us can share 2. The first stage of what we have found to lead to truly effective interfaith dialogue is not starting by discussing our similarities, nor starting with our disagreements, but starting with creating contexts in which we can meet each other as human persons, sharing our stories. We believe the first stage of what will develop into effective interfaith dialogue is meeting each other on the level of what we know the most, sharing our stories, relating as human beings. We believe that the second stage is examining what we consider to be the core teaching, not the core belief, but the core teaching in each of our traditions or in each of our lives. What is it we use when we seek to measure some critical decision, some important choice? What is it we use as our beacon, whether within our tradition or within the lives we are living? We believe those are the first two stages that can set the foundation for more effective interfaith dialogue.
Thanks, Brother Ted. So the stage 3 then, as you will see, flows from those first two, and it is an invitation, we feel, to consider the verses and practices in our own traditions that are consistent with our core teachings, and equally, at least equally important, to consider the verses and practices that are inconsistent with our core teachings. In other words, which of the practices represent genuine spiritual wisdom, and on the other hand, which represent more of an egocentric desire to fulfill some particular human need? That's the third stage. The fourth stage, then, having experienced those first three and developed a certain amount of trust, which is essential, absolutely essential in interfaith dialogue, we can then move into those more difficult conversations. For example, among the three of us, the conflict between the people of Israel and the people of the Palestinian territories is one of the places that has been a very difficult conversation to have. But if you've had that experience of developing that trust, it is possible to hear what the other is saying and to think about that before responding. The other part of that, though, let's talk about Christianity, for example. In my tradition, it's important also for me to be able to hear what people in the more conservative, more evangelical parts of Christianity are saying, what they believe, what their stories are, so I can understand better who they are and why they believe what they do. These are crucial things in interfaith dialogue. Brother Jamal.
Thank you, Brother Don. And if we have gone through those 4 stages, there's some trust, and we begin to feel from within that all religions are paths to a shared universal. I'm a Muslim. I'm rooted in Islam, but I know from my own experience, from my own being, that when I'm open to the beauty and wisdom of other traditions, this waters my own Islamic roots, makes me a better Muslim and a more developed human being, which is why we say interfaith is not about conversion. It is about completion, becoming a more complete, developed human being. And the 6th one is the critical need to do spiritual practices, whether you have a religion or you don't have a religion. 2 quick examples. I was on a panel on racism, and this African-American professor said, do you know every 28 hours, an African-American is being killed by state-sponsored violence? It's a controversial statistic. We were quite amazed. He said, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is the African-American is being killed 1 billion, with a B, B for boy, 1 billion times a day. We said, how? He said, by those stereotyped, conditioned biases and prejudices we have of the other. They're lazy people, they're draining the economy. That is the real problem. If we want to make a structural change, a fundamental difference, we have to overcome those biased conditions. And then the other example of planetary degradation, this wonderful scientist during President Carter's time who said, for 30 years, I've thought the biggest environmental problems are loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse. And with 30 years of good science, we can take care of it. He said, now I've realized the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. Science cannot take care of it. It requires spiritual practices.
But once again, here's the key, and that is sharing the parts of our own traditions where we ourselves have gone astray, naming those truths.
We believe our traditions have gone astray when we support exclusivity. We believe our traditions have gone astray when we support violence, often in the name of exclusivity. We believe our religions go astray when we support the inequality of men and women. We believe our religions have gone astray when we support homophobia. We believe our religions go astray when we support systemic racism, when we support the radical economic disparity of our culture, when we support inequality of all kinds, inequality of income, economy, when we support the radical increase of poverty. We believe our religions go astray when we support in one way or another environmental degradation, and we believe our religions go astray when in this time of pandemic, we are not universally supporting the imperative of caring for each other as a way of caring for ourselves.
But dear brothers, wouldn't you say that the biggest overarching umbrella problem is the problem of exclusivity?
Brother Jamal, I hear you saying that, but I have to tell you that we Jews are the chosen people. From among all other peoples of this universe, God chose us as God's treasured special people. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 2.
Excuse me, Rabbi, no, excuse me. Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God except by me.
Not my Bible.
Hey, brothers, here is the real truth. The Quran says, whoever chooses religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted of him, and he'll be one of the losers in the hereafter. Chapter 3, verse 85. All of you listening, please make a note for your sake.
Now, often at such a point, interfaith dialogue collapses. You know, when suddenly, even though we think we're having a reasonable discussion and we're all on the same track, all of a sudden something comes up that just maybe we hadn't even anticipated that it lives within us. Unless we realize that our straying itself has purpose. Our straying itself is an invitation to grow.
You know, this conflict might reveal the places where our minds are closed, our hearts are clenched, and we need to do some work, some inner work to overcome this.
You know, our straying presents an opportunity in this problem, which is the opportunity to call ourselves back, to transcend the places where we've been before. We can open our minds and our hearts to the deeper resources of our own traditions and come to a new place, a more inclusive place.
For example, using the core teaching of an evolving consciousness of oneness. I do understand that we Jews are the chosen people, but we are chosen for the way of Torah. We are chosen for a very precious heritage. And Christians are chosen, but chosen for the way of Jesus. Muslims are chosen for the way of the Quran. Every authentic spiritual tradition is chosen for the wisdom of its own way, to add the tapestry, to build into the fabric of spiritual wisdom of humankind. In fact, each and every one of us is chosen. We're chosen to realize the unique opportunities we have in our time and place to open and to share the deeper influences of oneness, of love, and of compassion in our world. Each of us chosen to be, to meet, and to celebrate and to express the one we are.
Thank you for that healing insight, Brother Ted. Where is the healing in the verse I said? John 14, verse 6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which is a verse, as you probably know, that has been one of the principal building blocks of the Christian repudiation of Judaism and anything that's not Christian. So how do we deal with this? After all, Jesus was so completely inclusive of everybody. Women, the poor, the disenfranchised, even the rich. Did Jesus, I think the question we have to ask is, did Jesus really intend to refer to himself exclusively? You know, there's this passage in the Exodus story where Moses is confronted by God in the burning bush episode and discovers the name of God as I am. And there are those who suggest that when we hear Jesus say, I am the way, because in both Hebrew and Aramaic, the to be verb in the present tense is not spoken or written, it's understood. And so this could be understood to be, I am is the way, the truth, and the life. In other words, God is the way. It's not some egocentrism, it's spiritual wisdom. Brother Jamal.
Thank you, Brother Don. You know, my friends, you've made note of 385. Please also make a note of chapter 3, verse 84, the verse preceding that. It is probably one of the most inclusive verses in the Quran. It says, oh God, we accept and honor what you've sent to us, but we also accept and honor what has been sent to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, what is revealed to Moses and to Jesus and all the prophets who came before Muhammad, and we make no distinction between the prophets. You see, what 385 is saying is that Islam, and what does the word Islam mean? Islam means to surrender in peace. But what are you surrendering? The Quran is saying and suggesting you're surrendering your attachment to your ego. 385 came even before Islam was a religion. And what 385, that chapter and verse is saying, is that whether you have a religion or don't have a religion, if you don't do the work of Islam, surrender your attachment to your ego, you will be a loser here and in the hereafter.
It's important for us to remember as we move forward that we are moving from exclusivity of consciousness to inclusivity of consciousness. We are unfolding to a more inclusive identity. We're moving to understand that the golden rule is actually a golden reality. Because everything we do to the other, we are doing to ourselves. There is no other. It is just the same being, the same presence, the same life, the same consciousness, awakening within every being on this planet.
And so in that sense, we are moving from an exclusive story to an inclusive story. Our individual stories have kept us apart, have kept us separate, but we're part of a larger story, a more inclusive story, as clearly reflected in the pandemic that crosses boundaries and reminds us, if we're paying attention, just how connected we all are. We are all part of a greater story.
And we all need community. we're moving from exclusive community to inclusive community. We must interact with the other. Rumi says a wall standing alone is useless. Add to it other walls, it can support a roof, even a granary. Only when ink joins with a pen can the blank paper say something. We need communities and to interact with the other.
We need to remember that spirituality is always inclusive.
Spirituality embraces the parts of us afraid to embrace.
A verse in the Quran says, every so way you turn is the face of Allah. It's all one.
Brothers, now the moment everybody, and especially Amartat, has been waiting for. The Interfaith Amigos theme song. It's a little bit challenging to sing together in an online platform. So we will each share our own line individually, and just encourage people to imagine that in another reality, we're all singing together. Our theme song contains Hebrew, Arabic, and English. The Arabic, Brother Jamal.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. In the name of God, boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. It's all one.
And the Hebrew, Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu, the absolute one awakens within each and every one of us as the essence, the truth, the reality of our being that is the one. And the English?
The English is, it's all one, and I am as I am, which means it's all one, and I am as I am.
Finally got that clear. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah.
Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu. Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu.
It's all one, and I am as I am. It's all one, and I am as I am.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all. I miss us all singing together, though, I must say, It's all one, and I am as I am. Can we all try that together? It's
all one, and I am as I am.
Thank you. You're right. It does come out a little bit off.
Yeah.
But, what you shared today was at first terribly moving, at least for me and maybe for others, when you talked about the exclusion that you all felt at different moments, and then ending it with this moment of unity together. And that's the trajection that we all are hoping can happen, that we go from the pain of the separation to the joy of the unity together. And so again, thank you for all of this. In the book you've written several books, but I think this was your second book, Religion Gone Astray, What We Found at the Heart of Interfaith, a landmark book, a fantastic book. And what you talked about were you talked about it today in brief, the characteristics that you have in your own faiths, your own religion, that you're grateful for and that you love and respect. And then there are some tendencies that trouble you. You call these the inconsistencies, and the fact that the core values fight against these inconsistencies. You were so clear to bring it out. But you've been doing this now for almost 20 years. And these are very controversial ideas, I would think, to some of your peers and some of the people within your own religion, that you're saying basically that these inconsistencies are perhaps not furthering the cause of the religion itself. So how do you deal with the criticism that comes to you? Maybe we could start with Imam Jamal.
Thank you, Brother Amartat. You know, every holy book, including the Quran, has two kinds of verses, particular and universal. Particular verses are in desperate need of historical and textual context. And universal verses are timeless, placeless, and filled with wisdom. The problem is if you take a particular verse and advocate that as a universal verse. And you know, particular verses are difficult. We can't use whiteout. We cannot engage in holy amnesia. But what we can do is shine a higher light of awareness on it. You know, Gandhi was fond of saying that, you know, every religion has truths and untruths. Those revelations might be divine, but the human mind is less than divine. When a human mind touches a divine verse, the understanding can be less than divine. And one more point that Rumi used to make, he said, you know, when you interpret a difficult verse, a lot of it depends on your intention and consciousness. And he gave the example of a bee and a wasp. They drink from the same flower. One produces a sting, other one produces nectar. The last thing I want to say is difficult verses, we simply have to shine a higher light on it so that it gives us hope, inspiration, and serves the common good.
You know, I remember in the book, I won't get I'm looking for it, but I don't have the page marked, where you said that you, from your, I think it was from your mother or your grandmother, she said that, yes, with the words of the Quran, you read them, but then the question is, who is interpreting those words and with what intent?
That's absolutely right. Yes, absolutely right.
And you know, I think historically, if we look at the history, you all are probably more adept than I am. You'll see how the original words of the founding fathers of Jesus, of Muhammad, and of Abraham, perhaps have gotten distorted over time by the way that they've been interpreted. But I'm interested to know, how do you all deal with criticism from your own religious people, if in fact that is the case, that you do get criticized? Perhaps Reverend Don or Ted, you can comment.
Well, yes, yes, we certainly do get criticized. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that what we're saying are our opinions, but we're saying them as an invitation, not an attempt to coerce, but an attempt to invite people to engage critical thinking, as in the third stage of interfaith dialogue, where we invite people to think about the relationship between core teachings and verses and practices. Critical thinking, the encouragement to use critical thinking has not been a hallmark of religious leadership in any of our traditions. I mean, we, of course, would like it to be, but that we hope will come. The other thing that is necessary, and we feel it's important to listen and to be sure that we have understood the criticism that we're receiving, instead of simply fighting back. Sometimes all we can do is say, this is what we hear you saying, and it would be helpful if we could understand your story and the relationship between your story and what you believe. We don't always have time for that. Sometimes we just have to let it go at that and agree to disagree. But it would be so helpful, having listened and having heard a person's story and the relationship between story and belief, to then have a chance for, in my case, me, to do the same thing. Those are the kinds of things that then lead to these stages of interfaith dialogue that we've been talking about. But it's hard. And, I think we have to understand where people are coming from. Brother Ted?
Thank you, Brother Don. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Part of the reason it's complicated has to do with the historical situation of the Jewish people. There's always a consciousness of threat. There's a consciousness of threat in terms of the state of Israel, which, while it is projected as an incredible power in the region, is also incredibly small compared to the Muslim Arab countries that surround it. It's actually tiny, and it's found itself in a defensive posture continually, even from before statehood, but certainly as soon as statehood was developed. The Jewish people found themselves without any welcome at the end of the Second World War, the Nazi era. So there is a fear that inhibits capacity to trust that is required. And there are those who perceive the interfaith dialogue that the three of us have been involved in and expressing and teaching as a threat, as if we are not cognizant of the need for self-protection and for a wariness, for a basic distrust. We have felt that increasingly spiritual consciousness is the focus, is the goal of not only of an interfaith dialogue, not only of a non-faith dialogue, but of a human dialogue, reaching beyond sharing our stories, sharing ourselves as human persons, to finding ways of sharing ourselves as spiritual beings, as persons expressing a common spiritual consciousness.
Absolutely. Yes.
And there is a phenomenon of institutionalization that becomes a problem. Brother Jamal often jokes that God came down and revealed certain truths to some people, and then the devil came down and said, "Let me organize that for you." And that became religion. And that's not entirely fair, but the needs of the institution start eclipsing the spiritual focus for which a tradition came into being in the first place. And it's simply the nature of institutions. We human beings carry our own institution with us. It's called the ego. And just as a religious institution inhibits the full flow of spiritual awareness and spiritual focus, so too our individual institution of ego inhibits the full flow of the consciousness that each of us carries, the presence, the life that each of us carries. So in many ways, the upset that we meet is the upset of an institutionalized reaction to an inclusive message, where the institution fears for its own survival, just as an individual ego fears for its own survival, lest it awaken to the brilliance, the fullness of the identity that it has eclipsed.
That's why I appreciate especially what you've come as your sixth stage of the process. I mean, this was a recent development. You had only 5, now you have 6. I'm sure it's because you wanted to equalize the amount of speaker time.
That's the total reason.
Obviously, this is the reason. But the interfaith journey, as you described it, is a path to better understanding, needs to have spiritual practice. I think this was the premise you were using, and also that there's a paradigm shift in our time. That before, a lot of people relied on the institution, had to rely on, for lack of a better word, I don't want to use Big Daddy, but whatever, that some authority figure or an authority institution was going to help us come back into between the guardrails of ethics and morality and whatever else. But now we have the floodgates are open, so to speak. You mentioned that how people need to find these answers for ourselves now. We need to create the guardrail for ourselves. And when I made the movie Sunseed: The Journey, one of the teachers in the movie was called Sufi Sam. And one of his ideas, one of the things that he says, which was so apropos, is young people, he said, at that time, are not relying on outside direction. He says people want to experience the divine, not just hear about it. Mm-hmm. And of course, the young people then are me today, all of us at our age, right? And this is continued now more and more. If you look at what's happening in society, people are breaking away. This is why there's such an attraction to Buddhism or Eastern religion. You know, in my own Jewish upbringing, I broke away, so to speak, because it was too dogmatic, or I wasn't getting the deeper answers, or they go into esoteric branches like Kabbalah or Sufism, right? You've written this great book on Kabbalah, Rabbi, and Jamal, you wrote about the sacred laughter of the Sufis with the stories of Nasruddin Rumi. So you three are totally aligned with that. But I'm sure that the reason that people are searching is not just that they're disappointed with the religious institutions and all the negative things that have happened. They're also looking for that personal inner truth connection with God, however we try to explain what can't be explained in words. Can you each share with us any experiences that you have had personally, something you would call an epiphany or an encounter with the divine force, which strengthened the faith in your own religion, because you are firmly rooted in your own religious tradition? And I don't know who goes first.
Brother Ted.
You know, it's a continual journey. And I need to preface what I'm about to say to really acknowledge that I'm not done. My experience now has been enriched by working with a woman co-teacher, becoming far more aware of the terrible, terrible damage that patriarchy has done to women and to our spiritual heritage, and becoming more aware of a continual unfolding in my own understanding. I'll share one moment. I learned meditation in Hindu and Zen Buddhist traditions. I was already a rabbi, but I had no acquaintance with spiritual traditions within Judaism. That was not a part of seminary training. Kabbalah was a footnote, if anything. It was an intellectual understanding. It was in no way an experiential opening. And I had a practice of opening up a traditional prayer book from time to time and just opening at random, and wherever it fell, I would contemplate. And I opened it one day to a passage that is the most familiar of any passage. It's a passage from the book of Devarim, in English called Deuteronomy. Chapter 6, verse 4, it's called the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel. Israel essentially means you who strive for God. Talking about Jacob, the God wrestler. That which is eternal expresses as the many, and it's all one. The many, the one, it's one. And the next verse says, you shall love the eternal one. Then you can love the eternal one, your God, with a whole soul, with a whole heart, with all your energy. And then it says, and these words, which I give you today, shall be upon your heart. Now, it's interesting. I was sitting there looking at that. I mean, first I thought I was going to just turn the page because I knew it so well. Why look at it? And then I just went, okay, here it is. Well, in the biblical idiom, heart is where one thought, not where one felt. The idea of feeling with the heart is new, is post-biblical. Biblical, actually, it has some truth because there are brain cells in the heart. The heart does know. You shall, and it says, you shall repeat these words when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Now, I had been greatly influenced by a Jewish Hindu teacher named Ram Dass. And I had received a teaching from him about holding a focus, a meditative focus all the time.
He's also in the movie, by the way. He begins and ends the movie. I guess you know that. Yeah.
And it suddenly dawned on me that the Shema in that passage of Devarim, those were instructions for meditation. That was saying, hold this in your mind all the time. When you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. And so I began that as a practice. Nobody told me. It's not something I read, it just was there. It was like all this time, the many, many thousands of times I've read those passages, I never heard it. It's like, what else have I not heard? I still ask that question.
Yeah. Well, we have to keep constantly coming back. Right.
So all I can say is, after a year and a half of living with the Shema, living with those 6 words, an event happened in my life that convinced me it was time to start teaching. And my teaching unfolded as a focus on reclaiming spiritual wisdom within the Hebrew tradition that had been lost.
Yes.
And that's been the trajectory of my whole life.
Wow. Thank you. Brother Don, do you have anything you can share with us?
I do, quickly. And I think what you're asking is, was there a moment when we realized that we could get out from underneath the tradition of simply being an emanation of the tradition and see something bigger and so forth? And my moment happened in college when after my junior year, I got the extraordinary experience of going to Cairo. I was a lifeguard at the Nile Hilton Hotel, and I'd never been to New York before. So this was really a stunning experience. And after I left Cairo, after 2 months, I flew to Beirut to visit some friends in the place where my wife and I went to teach after we graduated. And they took me up into the mountains above Beirut and suggested I take a walk. And I found a promontory. And from that place, I could see what felt like the entire world. Beirut down below, the Mediterranean. And for me, I think it might have spoken differently to someone else, but for me, it said there's a bigger picture. There's a really bigger picture, and be open to the new. And I think from my experience, I had been waiting for that moment. And so that has helped to frame my sense of being ready to do what I'm doing with my two brothers here.
You know, it's amazing how just one moment, you both expressed it so well. And we try to put it into words, but that one moment can change everything. And it comes totally unexpected most of the time.
Right.
Brother Jamal.
Yeah, for me, it's very clear and very specific. My mother in 1991 came to visit me, and that same night she fell violently ill unexpectedly, and shockingly, in 7 days she died. And when my father heard the news, he was in Bangladesh. He was going to come and visit Seattle. He got so shocked. In 20 days, he died of a heart attack, but really of a broken heart. Wow. But they're very closely bonded as a couple. So the reason I'm saying this is, you know, in Islamic spirituality, they say we're all seekers. But there are two obstacles or two veils, the veil of health and wealth. When my health is good, or those of my loved ones, or I have wealth, not just money, also emotional security, all this talk about invisible world, doing the spiritual practices, the mystery of the world, you know, is not only very distant, it's not only irrelevant, it's very inconvenient until one of those veils shatter, as they inevitably will, like the death of parents. Then suddenly, you know, like I've been saying for so often, without really understanding, move from a knowledge of the tongue to a knowledge of the heart. Or I've been quoting Hafiz, who says, you know, something missing in my heart tonight, something missing in my heart tonight has made my eyes so soft, my voice so tender, my need for God absolutely clear. So after the death of my parents in this tragic, sudden way, I began to understand from a heart knowledge that yes, there is traffic and trade in those mysterious realms. And that was a big opening for me in my life.
Wow. Yeah, it's too bad that it came from such a tragedy, but often the most difficult things we go through can be moments of illumination.
Right. Yeah.
Many people no longer believe in God or scriptures. Some have turned away from organized religion because they feel the religions have supported inequality, intolerance of different sexual preferences, cultural preferences. You went through a long list of things that some people have accused organized religion of not being of perpetrating, actually, of continuing. And sadly, wars and much human suffering came from often religious differences. What would you say to these people? Do we still need formal religion? I don't have an individual director, but Rabbi Ted usually starts, but if someone else wants to.
I usually start, and then Pastor Don and Imam Jamal correct me.
Oh, let's do it that way.
I don't think there's a way to do away with religion. I think we are essentially religious beings. I think we are essentially spiritual beings. I think we are essentially encountering a reality in which we appear to manifest physically, but on so many levels know that we are more than this physical manifestation. Every time I look in the mirror, and it increases now as my external appearance changes so radically, I realize that the one who is looking is not actually identified with age. The one who is looking is the same one who is looking always. The one who is looking is not defined by the ego constructs of role or of name or of age or of place or of position or of physical characteristics. There's something happening. There's something being here that is simply more. And were we somehow to absolutely do away with all religious traditions, they would once again awaken in whatever form. They would awaken with a purity until it became institutionalized. Then we would have repeats. So I don't think there's any way to get away from it. I do think there's a way to reclaim the essential spiritual awakening that actually led to the formation of every tradition. And that awakening was expressed through a specific language, through a specific culture, through a specific historical period, through a specific group of people, but it was not meant to be exclusive. It was meant to be inclusive. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of my tradition, it was not perceived as a religion. Right. It was not perceived as an institution.
Yeah.
It developed into that. The oneness was oneness. This was to be seen as a oneness of all people, including all the peoples of the universe. And then the institutionalization and the ego separation just manifests not only on an individual level, on a small group level, but on a level of religious affiliation as well. So frankly, I think it's an irrelevant question. You know, even the great spiritual teachers whom you referenced in that movie in the 70s, in many ways, they were outliers of their own traditions. They were expressing something to people beyond the tradition from which they were speaking. You know, they themselves were presenting a non-institutionalized format. However, if we look at the consequences of each, like Shlomo, God bless him, Shlomo Karlebach,
for sure,
he was, in his own way, he developed, whether accidentally or on purpose, his own group of followers, his own group, of disciples. And and that became a right way and a wrong way, to be Jewish.
Yes.
It's inevitable. And somehow we need to continually remind ourselves of something greater going on, something more inclusive going on. And as you said, Amritat, that is the function of spiritual practice.
Thank you for that. I think you all are outliers, honestly.
No question about it.
Yes?
Yeah.
But it's wonderful. Jamal, I'd love to hear your answer, but I just want to remind the audience, we will take some questions. So please, if you have questions you'd like to ask, send them on the chat. Brother Jamal.
I'll say very quickly, we say that everybody has religion, has faith, even atheists and agnostics. I love the story of this atheist father who tells his son, there is no God. And the son, who is been told to be critical and ask critical questions, says, Father, how do you know? And the father says, son, you got to take it on faith. So we all have faith. Atheists and agnostic, they simply call God by different name. They call it truth, justice, compassion, humanity. And whether we have a religion or not, we all need, as you were saying, Brother Amritat, those spiritual practices. For example, we all say there's no such thing as a Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, or Hindu, or Buddhist silence. It's just silence. We want to practice
beautiful
silence.
Yeah.
How to be more compassionate, capacity to forgive. These spiritual practices, regardless of religion, call it psychological, we all need that, whether we have a religion or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that. And Don, before you start, just reminding also the audience that we're going to have spiritual practices after the audience questions our guests have prepared for us. Please, Brother Don.
You know, just to add a footnote to what my colleagues have said, which I agree with completely. If I had my pastoral ministry to do over, I would start every church council meeting with a discussion of how are we doing in terms of fulfilling the purposes for which our tradition was formed. Are we on track, or have we drifted? And are we spending too much time, or a larger proportion of time than we should, just maintaining the institution? We're always, as Brother Ted said, we're always going to have the institution, but can we, as he said, recover the reasons for which the institution came into being, the spiritual wisdom that got put into our institutions, which are conveyances for spiritual wisdom? How are we doing on that? And what are the resources in our traditions that can help us understand that? I think that's really crucial. And of course, the word God points to something that can't be described. I mean, many people have an image. I remember a long time ago, Rabbi Ted said that he thought as a kid that Rabbi Brickman was God, or looked like God. Now Ted looks like God. No, I mean, it's the old guy in the clouds. That's where all three of us, that's where we are, except that that's not it at all. God is I am. God is being. God is the universe. God is all kinds of things that have nothing to do with a male image. And yet people drift from religion because that's the only thing somehow they've connected with and want to disconnect. So I think part of our message is to try to move people beyond that image to something more inclusive.
Yes. Thank you all for your inspiring replies, many times moving. Now I know you're not afraid of the difficult questions, so we can turn it over to our audience. But just before we do that, I want to remind the audience that if you've enjoyed our Wisdom Talk today, don't miss the future Wisdom Talks and all the other events we have here on the Sunseed Group. Our next one, next month, is going to be with Krishna Das and his music. So be sure you sign up for our mailing list. I think you can either see it just below the screen, or if not, you can go to our website, sunseed.org. Sign up for our mailing list so you'll be on all of our future announcements. If you're on YouTube, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, if you go to our website, please take a look at the movie Sunseed: The Journey, because the movie was really based around the concept of the unity in the diversity. And all the outlier teachers that are in there really practiced that and brought it as possible into the world. So first question from the audience. My producer, Marcus, can you share with us any of the questions so I can read them, please?
I see the question. Do you see the question, Amortai?
No, unfortunately, I don't. Would you mind? Wait a second. I'm expanding my screen. And yes, now I see it. Okay. This is by Kevin. Thank you for the question, Kevin. My question is, when Jesus says, no man can go to the Father except through him, isn't that an absolute that possibly creates division, and is the basis of the Three Amigos interfaith union actually the interfaith union of love?
Well, let me just quickly say that yes, it has seemed to be an absolute that has created division, no question about it. I think that part of the verse, though, is based more on the needs of the ego rather than spiritual wisdom. And I think it's important. I mean, this is my feeling. This is my opinion, based on ministry of 50 years and so forth. But it has to be an invitation to think about whether or not that is consistent with unconditional love or inconsistent. And I think that one, that little piece of that verse is inconsistent. We want always to find ways to expand our vision and move toward that inclusivity that is at the heart of all of our traditions.
I think it's important to acknowledge that the Christian tradition, as it was developing, did everything in its power to remove itself from Judaism. And without going into any explanation of why that was so important and all that, one of the consequences of that was trying to remove Jesus from Jesus's own Jewishness. Jesus lived, taught, and died as a Jew. He lived, taught, and died because he was Jew. He was part of a community that was occupied by Rome, a part of a community whose freedom was diminished because of that occupation. And his quotes, like one of the things that is very challenging for me is when the quotes from Jesus from his Torah are not ascribed to his Torah or to his Jewishness, but ascribed to the Christian Bible, which of course is a text he never saw. I frankly do not believe that Jesus was trying to start another religion. I believe that Jesus was speaking to an inherent spirituality that needed to be realized within his own tradition. And I experienced how the removal of Jesus from his own people has created such animosity and hatred of his people that has plagued my Jewish community through the ages, and still, without any recognition that you took my literature and tried to kill the people whose literature it is. Sometimes I realize that all the chapter and verse demarcations in the Hebrew Bible are Christian. We Jews didn't do that. We separated things by portions in the Torah, not by verses. So there's often disparity in the counting of the verses. The very name of the books got taken away from us, so that when we talk about the book of the Shema, or let's say the book of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which gets translated, which gets ascribed to Matthew. It's Vayikra. It's in a book that got named Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 18. I am is so clearly a profound awakening to the inclusivity of God. And I can't believe, I see Jesus as the most well-known Jewish spiritual teacher in history. And I hear his I am as the I am is. Just as I hear that in Psalm verses and in verses from the Torah, that I utilize as my teachings and as my references and as my meditations. So it's a very, very important question, and it's something just very important to allow the possibility that this was a major spiritual teaching.
And Brother Amar, may I just take this opportunity to say that in Islam, Jesus, peace be upon him, is very, very profoundly, deeply regarded as a prophet. Among many titles, he's called Ruh Allah, Spirit of God, and very special in that he's the only prophet who never died. What does the Quran say? He was so afflicted that in such great anguish that God, out of infinite compassion, made Jesus rise up to him. So he still lives. And the Islamic tradition says before end times, who will come down to earth? It's not Muhammad, not Moses, not Abraham. It is Jesus who will come down and establish an era of peace and justice before end times.
Interesting. Wow. We have another question, I believe. This is from the World Dream Fund. So I don't know who that is, but whoever's behind the World Dream Fund, you have all of our thanks for your question. Why do so many wars revolve around religion? And how do we prevent history from continually repeating itself again?
I know that Brother Jamal wants to begin this one.
Yes. Well, actually, wars, here's a wonderful saying by the Sufi teachers that we are searching among the branches and leaves for what really appears in the roots. Most of these wars, which revolve around religion, is not really about religion. It's really a fight and a conflict over money or power. It could be about oil resources or geopolitical power. Suicide bombing, for example. The research shows that the perpetrators, 95% of them, are not religious people. And they did it because they want to throw off this political yoke. So that's one thing. The authority of religion is used to justify wars in most cases. That's one point. The other point I wanted to make that Islamic teachers want to make is that we'll always have wars as long as we don't resolve the wars within ourselves. If we don't reconcile the conflict as a spiritual practice we have inside of us, this will reflect in wars outside of us. In Islam, the word jihad actually means effort. And the lesser jihad is to defend yourself if you're being attacked. So there's a very famous story of the Prophet Muhammad. After returning from the battle, he said, okay, we have defended ourselves. We have done the lesser jihad, which means effort. Let's now do the greater jihad. They said, what's the greater jihad? He said, this is the work of taking care of the enemy inside us, between our ribs, our desire for revenge, our righteous anger, lapsing into bloodthirsty revenge. Unless we take care of that, there'll always be wars outside us.
Really a failure to recognize the nature of our own being, and the difference between an ego defensiveness and the ego defensiveness of an institution, of an institutionalized religion. We get this notion that there are evil people, or there are people who are violent, and we need to just get rid of them. And certainly we could see that being acted out even in the political climate right now in this country. And it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident, who said, if only it was so simple that we could find and identify the evil people and banish them, get rid of them, and make everything okay. But alas, the line separating good and evil, openness and closedness, self and expanded identity runs through the heart of every human being. And how many of us would want to rip out a part of our own heart? You know, that there is the need to recognize an essential common oneness, an essential common life, and just realize that it's not about, it can never be solved. War will never work. Any war will always lead to the next war. That's the lesson of history. You can't get out of war by war.
And I think too, just to add quickly, the misuse of the authority of religion is what's going on with these religious wars. And as my colleagues have said, religion is often used as a disguise for the desire for coercive power or money. And we really need to wake up and be able to recognize when the authority of religion is being used effectively and accurately or not.
You know, I feel that's one of the reasons that you're doing this interfaith work, because you see the urgency of trying to build these bridges between the religion, the Abrahamic religions, especially, who control, you know, I don't know what the percentages of the earth, but it's certainly more than half of the earth. And as you said before, it's a matter of urgency now, that with the means of destruction we have and the divisions we're feeling, it's a matter of urgency. So I really am so grateful for you all to be doing this ongoing work. I believe we have one more question before we get into your practices. Marcus, can you share this is from the Daily Word. Again, I don't know who that is or where it's from, but thank you for your question. How do we convince everyone to get along and stop killing each other? Great question.
I think Don has the answer to that one.
Oh, thanks, Ted. I understand, I think we understand the desire in that question, and we all have it. But I don't think there's an answer to whether or not we can convince everyone, but we can certainly convince ourselves and grow spiritually to the point where things start to change over time. And that increase in spiritual awareness and strengthening of spiritual identity is really what is needed. And we're saying too that, historically there's been leadership calling us back, and now we're saying we've got to call ourselves back. That's the only way. We can't be an emanation of someone else's teachings. We have to learn to call ourselves back, and that's the road that we need to take to get finally to the answer to this important question.
I would say let us all practice, as my brothers have been saying, we have been saying, the 3 cups of tea. Listen, respect, connect. And you don't have to go very far and find extremists and difficult people. Start in your own extended family and practice those 3 cups of tea. Somebody who disagrees with you politically, has a different religious view, do that work and become aware of how it affects you, what comes up for you. In Sufism, we have lots of practices called sacred holding, difficult feelings which come up. They are sacred. All feelings are sacred, say the Quran. Honor them and just be with them and allow that to grow you as a human being. Start in your own extended family, sharing 3 cups of tea and maturing spiritually.
And I would say, one of the things that has come out of research about bullies, and certainly something that I experienced when I was growing up, is that the bully is not actually able to change on their own. And that's a bully individual or a group. that feels like their only recourse is to destroy someone else or beat up someone else or claim power over someone else. Nor is the victim actually the one capable of changing the situation. I mean, you have all kinds of stories about the victim learns martial arts and then defeats the bully, but that's far more a movie script than it is reality. The people who have the power are those who witness. I remember lying on the floor after being beaten up and watching a group looking on. It becomes clear in later research that the onlookers, the witnesses, actually they have the power. I think what's lacking is the willingness of the majority of us who actually are not in favor of killing. It's not natural. In war training, you got to train people to be able to kill. It's not natural unless someone is so inflamed with the passion of anger, and then people wind up doing things that in calmer moments they would not have done. But I really think the responsibility lies with the majority culture. I think the majority of us have to start naming what's happening. Not only naming when the perpetrator is a Muslim or the perpetrator is a Jew or the perpetrator is an African American, but identifying every time the perpetrator is a Christian and encouraging the Christian community, which is clearly the majority community in this country, to rise up and to stand between the bully and the victim and say, this will not happen. It is a requirement on a physical level to express a reality on a spiritual level.
Amen. Wow. Thank you, really, all of you, for such an amazing time we spent together. I feel like, Brother Jamal, we've had the first cup of tea now. I hope we all can get back together again for cups 2 and 3. It's been a fascinating dialogue. And I hope that our audience, that you will share this with your circles of people, because this will be now put up on our website, sunseed.org. It'll be on our YouTube channel. So you can look at parts of it again, because I definitely want to go back and look at some of the other things that I might have missed, or hear them a second time, and you can share it with everyone. I think this is a very important message we get out, especially to the friends of ours in the Abrahamic religious groups who are not part of the Sunseed community, because in a way we're preaching to the choir here. Most of the people here do feel religious unity, but there's so many people we've got to still reach. So now it's time for the great thing I've been waiting for all day, is your prayers or practices. And I assume that Rabbi Ted, you will go first, as you usually do. It was explained to me they're going to do it in the historical order of the way that everything developed. So obviously first came the Jewish people, and then came the Christian faith, and finally Islam. But anyway, please go ahead, and I'm ready to close my eyes or do whatever I need to do.
I would just thank you, Emertad. I would just say one thing about part of our order is also by our age, because the oldest one goes first before I nod off and fall asleep too soon. One of the challenges of one tradition following and, arising after another is that there is a tendency to view that new tradition as superseding the tradition that came before. And it becomes difficult to remember, and a hidden reality, particularly within the Christian community and within the Muslim community, of the continuing evolution of what is still unfolding as Judaism, as what is still unfolding as a literature, an evolving literature, an evolving understanding of an ancient literature. Judaism did not end with the advent of Christianity, as Christianity did not end with the advent of Islam, just as Islam did not end with the advent of Baha'i. And one of the things we seek to speak to is the ongoing unfolding of teaching, wisdom, understanding, and literature within each of our traditions. The practice I'd like to share is a practice coming from 18th century teaching called Hasidism, an awakening heralded by a teacher named Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer in the 1700s, at a time of great darkness for the Jewish community, a time of pogroms, a time of struggle, and a time of strife, a time of suffering under a Christian community. And the teaching of Rabbi Israel, who became called the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name of God, or the good master of the name of God, brought a revival of a joyful, prayerful, songful, danceful celebration of presence, celebration of being, back into a time radically in need of that spiritual awakening. And one of the things that the Baal Shem would do and his disciples would do when approached by one seeking spiritual guidance, spiritual practice, would be to provide them with a verse from the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and say, meditate on this, and then come back and tell me about it. And when someone would come back, she or he would share what they understand, and the teacher, she or he, would encourage that person to either go on to the next verse, go on to the next practice, or take that verse again. And one of the verses that I use often in my own meditation is a Psalm verse from Psalm 46. In my Tanakh, it's verse 46:11. For those of you who have other translations, it might appear as 46:10. I do it, of course, in the Hebrew. Harpu ud'u ki anochi Elohim. Be still and know that I am is God. Be still and know that I am is God. The meditation, the focus, encourages us to withdraw our attention from the objects of our consciousness to the radical, inclusive nature of the consciousness itself, the consciousness ourself. Harpu, be still. Stop the searching, stop the needing, stop the yearning, stop the not yet, stop the not quite. Harpu. Udu, and awaken to the knowing that is already there. It's not finding what you don't have. It's remembering. And it's not remembering the what, it's remembering the who. Harpud u. Stop and know. Stop that you can remember. Anochi, your I am. Your I am. Your consciousness is God, is the one manifesting as you. So for those of you who don't know Hebrew, I'm going to suggest focusing on the English. For those of you who are comfortable with the Hebrew, I encourage you to allow Harpu Udu Ki Anochi Elohim. And if you like, just use the first word, Harpu. Stop. Udu and know. Stop so you can know. And for those of you following in English, stop. Be still. That you might know that your I am is God. And take a few moments now in the silence we share to be still and to know the one you are. Be still and know the one I am. Behind the body, I am. I have a body, but I am more than that body. Behind the mind, I am. I have a mind, but I am more than that mind. I have feelings, but I am more than my feelings. I have a personal identity with which I walk this world. I seek to utilize that identity in the service of that which is greater within me, realizing that I have that identity. That identity does not have me. Behind that identity, I am. I am the wholeness I am the unlimited consciousness of being. I am one. Harpu ud'u ki anochi Elohim. When I am still, I know I am is God. Please allow yourselves to take a gentle breath and know that this is a simple practice you can return to at any time. A practice of remembering the one you are and the one we are, that we might express that one through our words, through our actions, through our very being in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ted. I think it's really important from my point of view to say that any meditation in the Christian tradition needs to be approached with the sensibility and awareness that comes from the meditation we just experienced from Rabbi Ted, the I am. I want to suggest the Christian experience of Visio Divina, the image of God. The most common Christian meditation is called Lectio Divina, or meditating on the text, the reading. I just want to depart from that and go to something else called Visio Divina. And this was common, especially in the Eastern traditions, using an icon. But it's possible to do this with any image. And before you, you now see an image of Rembrandt's famous painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son. Thank you so much for getting this, Marcus and Emmertot. This hangs in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. And I want you to notice a couple of things as we move into some breathing and so forth. But they're the hands of the parent on the son. One hand represents strength and the other tenderness. It's just an astonishing combination of sensations and so forth. And so the return of the son is met with acceptance and forgiveness and unconditional love. But off to the side, on the right-hand side, we see the older son who is still in his own distant country, that place of estrangement, because he has not yet been able to understand the meaning of unconditional love as it is expressed through forgiveness and acceptance. And so, noticing these things, now focus your eyes on this image and breathe in and breathe out in the traditional sense of meditation, but focus on these things, noticing we are the sons, both of us, both of the sons, we are both of these people in need of this and not realizing sometimes that we need it. And we yearn to have the spiritual awareness and strength of spiritual identity to be the bearer of those hands. So let us breathe in and breathe out an awareness of our own beings within an awareness of I am, and stopping harpu to experience these things. Focus on the painting. Continuing to breathe in and breathe out, you've become aware of just how important it is to stop harpu and to notice, in this case with Visio Divina, the aspects of this painting and this story which draw us in, both as where we are and where we would like to be. And it portrays both our light side and our shadow side, all of the aspects of reality. Continue to breathe in and breathe out. And remember that the parent, in the parent's greeting of this child, represents the ways in which I am intends to greet us. And now come into fuller awareness and open your heart to the meaning of this experience. Amen.
Thank you, Brother John. And continuing with the theme, remembrance of gratitude, the first practice. And I'd like to introduce that story of the mullah, fictional character through whom many truths are conveyed. So the story is that the mullah has lost his donkey. That's a big deal in that part of the world. Helper, source of livelihood. The entire village tries to find the donkey. There is no donkey. Donkey is lost forever. They come to give mullah the bad news. And where is the mullah? He's in the town square on his knees saying, Allah, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. They say, mullah, you have not heard the bad news. Your donkey is lost forever. So I know, but I'm so grateful because imagine what could have happened to me if I was on the donkey. Of course, it's a funny story, has many levels of meaning. One level of meaning is if I continue giving thanks in times of difficulties, afflictions, I'm actually giving thanks for unknown blessings already on their way. So simple practice in all traditions. I know many of you do it. So for me, it has changed my life as often as possible, touching my heart and saying, thank you. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for things small, medium, big. I even have a prayer that I love very much, a Sufi prayer. Oh God, Favor upon favor have you bestowed upon this handful of dust. Thank you, oh God. Favor upon favor have you bestowed upon this handful of dust. Thank you. So, again, the practice is as often as possible, touching the heart in gratitude again and again and again in the course of the day. That's one practice. The other practice is a meditation, and I'd like to lead you through that. That also has changed in my life, so I'd like to share that. So just gently close your eyes, focus on your nostril, and simply become aware of the in-breath and the out-breath. Just this much, being present with the inhalation and the exhalation for a few moments. And now let go of this, but this time, please bring your attention to rest on your physical heart. Our heart has been yearning, aching, thirsting to connect with us. So if it works for you, take one hand or both hands, put it over the heart and feel your heart. Envelop your heart with your consciousness. Connect with your heart and begin to bond with the beat, the rhythm of the heart. And now, with the heart listening to this beautiful revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream where God, divinity, spirit says to each one of us, God says, beloved one, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart. Just being with that mystery, that spirit, divinity is outside of us and inside of us, in our heart. The space of the heart is actually infinite, boundless. Just be with that mystery for a few moments. The Quran says, to God, to the God of all of humanity, belong the most beautiful names. When we praise God, thank God, God doesn't become holy, we become holy. So now, this part of the practice is focusing on the boundless space of the heart where our beloved resides, with a capital B, and saying some words of beauty, some suggestions by Sufis, words like, I love you, I really love you, or please help me to love you. And to say it with feeling, with sincerity, no matter how awkward it might feel initially. I love you. Please help me to love you. And or thank you. Thank you. I am so grateful. You can continue. Please help me. Please help me. I need help. I surrender to you. Or whatever else you want to say, but with feeling, unabashedly, no matter how awkward it feels. Place them deep into your heart and repeat them again and again and again and again. You can never overdo this. I love you. Please help me to love you. Thank you. I am so grateful. Please help me. I surrender to you. And whatever else, a few more times. And as you keep saying those words, a most beautiful, divine vibration filled with blessings, love, healing, empowerment is going from the tongue into the mouth, into the throat, into the chest, deep into the heart, and then into the hidden, and then even deeper into the hidden of the hidden, amazingly loving us, blessing us, healing us, empowering us, transforming us. And stop saying anything at all. Just be with your heart, cradle your heart, feel a connection, a bonding with this astonishing, enchanting organ, which is actually boundless in its inner spaciousness. And where spirit resides in the innermost chambers of our heart. And now coming into awareness, I shall do a chant and just coming into awareness with the finishing of the chant, the Bismillah one, a different tune. Bismillah, Bismillah, Rahman, Rahim. We begin in the name of Allah. And gently, at your convenience, opening your eyes and remembering to touch your heart as often as possible. Thank you.
I hate to break the silence, but I break it only with deep gratitude and respect for all that you've given and for all that you will give. Thank you again. So, again, to our audience, as we mentioned, next month we have a special holiday wisdom talk with the great spiritual force and musician Krishna Das. And we're going to explore his words and some of his experiences with his guru Nim Karoli Baba and Baba Ram Das. And he was actually there in the room when I was filming with Nim Kuroli Baba. So we'll probably talk a little bit about the film Sunseed the Journey as well. Be sure you join us next on Sunday, December 12th. Write it down. Sunday, December 12th, 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. But just join our mailing list and subscribe. You'll get all this information. And while you're on you can do that by going to sunseed.org. And by the way, while you're there, please go to our Guru store, because we have some great, beautiful merchandise there that helps indigenous peoples and other craftsmen around the world shop for good, because it also helps us support these free wisdom talks, to tell you the truth. So anything you can do will be very helpful. And that's all that I have to say, except I'm so grateful for you all to be with us today. I will see you on the next Wisdom Talk show. Until then, God bless you all. Blessings be upon you. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu alaikum. Om Hari Om. Jai Ram. May the long time sunseed shine upon you.
Namaste.
Namaste to you all.